The gate camera catches him first. Every guard at the compound straightens the second his car turns in. Nobody breathes. Nobody speaks. The man walking through that garden controls half the shipping lanes running out of Incheon, and men who cross him disappear without a headline. Today, something is different. He stops. Soap bubbles drift past his shoulder. A small girl shrieks with laughter, chasing them barefoot across the grass, and behind her, a woman with her sleeves rolled up is laughing just as hard, blowing another cloud of bubbles into the afternoon light. His daughter, actually laughing. Every member of staff watching from the windows braces for the explosion. Nobody touches his daughter without permission. Nobody makes noise in this house. Nobody breaks the silence he's built around her like a wall. Instead, he does something none of them have ever witnessed. He smiles. Just once. Just barely. Then he keeps walking, like he saw nothing at all. For a moment, the staff exchange glances. Maybe the ice finally cracked. Maybe grief finally loosened its grip on him. They have no idea what's coming next. Now back to Seoul. Because the moment that office door closes behind him, the smile is gone. Wiped clean, like it never happened. He picks up the phone before he's even sat down, and the first word out of his mouth will destroy everything that little girl just felt in that garden. Fire her. Doan, the house manager, stands frozen in the doorway of the office, phone still pressed against his ear from relaying the order he cannot believe he just heard. Sir, he says carefully, your daughter, she hasn't laughed like that since. I don't repeat myself. The words land like a door slamming shut. Baha doesn't look up from the ledger on his desk. His voice carries no anger, no heat, nothing that would suggest a man capable of rage. That somehow makes it worse. Calm is what makes his enemies disappear. Calm is what built an empire that stretches from the docks of Incheon to the back rooms of Gangnam, where men in expensive suits pretend they aren't afraid of him. Doyun has worked in this house for 11 years. He knows better than to ask twice. But he asks anyway. She's good with Isul, sir. Genuinely good. The doctors said. The doctors said a lot of things about my wife, too, Baha says, and the temperature in the room seems to drop several degrees. None of it kept her alive. Silence swallows the office whole. Doyun understands now. This was never about the nanny. This has never been about any of them. Since the funeral 3 years ago, Baha has built an invisible perimeter around his daughter, one measured not in meters, but in emotional distance. Every caretaker before this one lasted, on average, for months. Long enough to be useful, never long enough to matter. Attachment, in Baha's world, is a liability with a body count. He learned that lesson watching his wife's driver, a man who loved her like family, break under interrogation after her death, spilling secrets that nearly got Baha killed alongside her. Loyalty bought with affection collapses the instant someone applies pressure. Loyalty bought with fear does not. So he has made himself untouchable. And he has tried, however clumsily, to make his daughter untouchable too. The problem is that Isul is 7 years old, and 7-year-olds do not understand strategy. They understand bubbles in the sunlight. They understand a woman named Amanda who braids their hair and doesn't flinch when they cry. Doyun delivers the termination letter himself that evening, because he cannot bring himself to send someone else to do it. Amanda reads it once, standing in the doorway of the small guest cottage she's been given at the edge of the property. She doesn't cry. She doesn't argue. She folds the letter in half, then in half again, and tucks it into her cardigan pocket like something she intends to keep rather than discard. Can I say goodbye to her? She asks. Properly. Tomorrow morning. Doyun expects Baha to refuse. Instead, when he relays the request, Baha simply nods once and turns back to his paperwork, as though the matter has already stopped existing for him. It has not stopped existing for Isul. The next morning, the little girl runs across the garden the moment she sees Amanda waiting by the fountain, throwing her arms around her waist with the kind of certainty only children have. The certainty that some people are permanent. Are you leaving me too? The question isn't dramatic. It isn't performed. It's small and quiet and devastating. The way children ask the questions that matter most, without knowing how much weight they're carrying. Amanda kneels so they're eye level. Every instinct in her tells her to say something true. Every instinct in her also knows the truth would break this child in half. I'm going to visit your mommy for a while, she says instead. But I'll come back. I promise. It's a lie built entirely out of love, and it works exactly the way lies like that always do. Isol's face relaxes into a smile, small and trusting, and she hugs Amanda one more time before running off toward the house, already distracted by something in the grass, already believing the world is safe again. Amanda watches her go until she's out of sight. Then she takes an envelope from her cardigan pocket. Not the termination letter, a different one she's clearly written and rewritten several times, and presses it into Doyun's hand. "For your boss," she says. "Make sure he actually reads it. Not schemes it. Reads it." Doyun doesn't ask what's inside. Something in her expression tells him this isn't a plea for her job back. This is something else entirely. He delivers it to Baha's desk without a word. Baha doesn't open it for 6 hours. When he finally does, sitting alone in his office with a glass of untouched whiskey sweating rings onto the wood, he expects an appeal, a negotiation, perhaps even a threat dressed up as concern, the kind of manipulation he's grown fluent in detecting from people who want something from him. What he reads instead makes his jaw tighten. "Your daughter gets dizzy whenever she plays too long. She rubs her eyes even when she isn't tired. Twice this month, she stopped mid-sentence like she forgot what she was saying, then laughed it off like it was nothing. My little brother had the exact same symptoms when he was 6. Please, whatever you decide about me, get her checked by a real specialist. Soon." He reads it twice. Then he does something that will haunt him for the rest of his life. He laughs, a short, humorless sound, and crumples the letter into a ball before tossing it toward the wastebasket, where it bounces off the rim and lands on the floor, forgotten. Another manipulation, he tells himself. Another woman trying to weaponize his daughter to stay relevant in his household. He has seen it before. Nannies, tutors, even one of his late wife's cousins, all finding creative ways to make themselves indispensable. He does not know, as he pours himself another drink that night, that 3 floors above him, his daughter is lying awake in the dark, quietly rubbing her temples, wondering why the room won't stop tilting. He does not know that the letter on his floor is not manipulation. It is a warning. And in 72 hours, he is going to wish, more than he has wished for anything since his wife's funeral, that he had read it a 3rd time. For now, though, life in the compound resumes its old rhythm, the rhythm that existed before soap bubbles and laughter interrupted it. A new tutor arrives on Monday, a stern, humorless woman handpicked precisely because she carries no warmth for anyone to latch onto. Isol sits through her lessons in silence, answering questions correctly but mechanically, the spark that Amanda coaxed out of her retreating back into whatever hiding place it came from. Nobody notices the small things at first. The way she presses her palm against her forehead between lessons. The way she asks to skip recess, something she has never once done in her life. The way, during dinner on the 2nd night, she stares at her plate for nearly a full minute before picking up her fork, as though she'd forgotten what it was for. Doyun notices. He always notices. But he also remembers, with painful clarity, what happened the last time he pushed Baha on a matter concerning his daughter, and he tells himself it's nothing. Children have off days. Children get tired. He tells himself this right up until the 3rd morning, when Isol doesn't come down for breakfast at all. The scream comes from upstairs before anyone reaches the 3rd floor. One of the housemaids finds Isol collapsed on the bathroom tile, her small body convulsing, her lips already tinged with a color no 7-year-old's lips should ever turn. The maid's tray of breakfast dishes shatters against the floor as she drops everything and screams for help. And within seconds the entire compound erupts into a chaos it has not seen since the night Baha's wife was carried out on a stretcher 3 years ago. Baha is in his office when he hears it. He doesn't remember crossing the house. One moment he's standing at his desk reviewing shipping manifests, and the next he's on his knees on cold bathroom tile, his daughter's limp body in his arms, screaming Doyun's name with a rawness in his voice that none of his employees have ever heard from him. The drive to the hospital takes 11 minutes. It feels like 11 years. Baha carries her into the emergency room himself, refusing every offer of a wheelchair or gurney, as though letting go of her for even a second might be the thing that finally takes her from him. Nurses swarm. Doctors bark instructions. Somewhere in the fluorescent blur of it all, Baha realizes he is shaking, and he cannot remember the last time his hands did that. He is not a man who shakes. He is a man other men fear because he does not shake. Hours pass in a waiting room that smells like antiseptic and bad coffee. Doyun sits beside him, saying nothing, because there is nothing to say to a man who has already begun disappearing into himself. When the doctor finally emerges, her expression is the particular kind of careful that experienced physicians reserve for news they know will break someone. She's stable, the doctor says. For now, but I need to be honest with you. This didn't happen overnight. The symptoms she's presenting, the dizziness, the disorientation, the seizure, these don't appear out of nowhere. If you'd brought her in sooner, even a week sooner, we'd be having a very different conversation right now. Baha's mouth goes dry. What are you saying? I'm saying whatever this is has been building for weeks. Possibly longer. She hesitates. Did anyone mention symptoms to you before today? Dizziness, forgetfulness, anything like that? The question detonates something behind Baha's ribs. He remembers, with a clarity that feels like drowning, a piece of paper crumpled into a ball on his office floor. A woman's careful handwriting. My little brother had the exact same symptoms. Please get her checked. Soon. He laughed at it. He threw it away. Doyun, sitting beside him, watches the color drain from Baha's face and understands, without being told, exactly what memory has just surfaced. Neither of them says Amanda's name. Neither of them needs to. For the first time and longer than he can remember, Baha feels something close to shame settle into his chest like a stone. They're allowed in to see her that evening. Isul is small in the hospital bed, tubes and monitors dwarfing her, her dark hair spread across a pillow too large for her. She's asleep, but restless, murmuring things that don't make sense, her small fingers twitching against the blanket. Then, sometime past midnight, her eyes open, glassy and unfocused, and she reaches toward a nurse checking her foreline. Mommy, she whispers. The nurse freezes. Mommy, why did you leave me? The words hang in the room like something physical, something with weight, and Baha, a man who has ordered things done to people that would make lesser men vomit, a man whose name alone empties restaurants in 3 districts, feels his knees nearly give out beneath him. Doyun has to look away. The nurse's eyes are wet. Even the hospital security guard posted outside the door, a man built like a refrigerator who has clearly seen his share of grief in these hallways, has to clear his throat and stare very hard at the wall. Isul isn't calling for her mother because her mother is coming. She's calling because in her fevered, half-conscious state, her mind has reached for the person who feels most like safety and found only absence where that person should be. Baha steps closer to the bed. His voice, when it finally comes, is barely a whisper. I'm here, he says. Baba's here. But she doesn't respond to him. Her hand falls back to the blanket. Her eyes drift shut again, and whatever comfort he's offering doesn't reach wherever she currently is. For a man who has spent 3 years building walls specifically so that nothing could ever hurt him this badly again, the realization arriving in that hospital room is almost unbearable in its simplicity. He built the wrong wall. He kept threats out. He kept grief out. He kept love out too, and in doing so, he removed the one thing that might have kept his daughter tethered to the world when the ground gave out beneath her. 3 days later, when Isul finally wakes fully and the doctors run their full battery of tests, the diagnosis lands with its own quiet devastation. A treatable condition, they explain, one that responds well to early intervention, one that would have posed almost no danger at all if caught in its earliest stages. Caught, for instance, 3 days ago, or 3 weeks ago, when a woman he fired without hesitation tried to warn him. Baha sits at his daughter's bedside that night long after visiting hours end, staff too afraid of him to ask him to leave, and stares at his own hands like they belong to a stranger. Somewhere in Seoul, in a small rented apartment she moved into after losing the only job she'd ever loved, Amanda has no idea that the little girl she said goodbye to at a fountain is lying in a hospital bed 3 miles away, refusing, for reasons the doctors cannot explain, to eat. By the 4th day, Isul's refusal has become a genuine medical concern. She accepts water when pressed, but pushes away every tray of food that arrives, turning her face toward the window instead, silent in a way that unsettles the nursing staff far more than her earlier delirium ever did. A child who was babbling nonsense about her dead mother is somehow easier to comfort than a child who has simply gone quiet. The attending physician calls it selective mutism brought on by trauma, a temporary shutdown while the brain recalibrates from crisis. She tells Baha, gently but firmly, that pushing too hard right now could do more harm than good. Baha tries anyway, because pushing is the only language he's ever fluently spoken. He brings her favorite foods from the house. He hires a specialist flown in from Singapore. He sits at her bedside for hours at a stretch, reading business reports aloud in a low voice simply so the room won't be silent, though he knows she isn't listening to a word of it. Nothing works. Then, on the fifth morning, Isul finally speaks. 3 words, delivered so quietly the nurse nearly misses them entirely. I want Auntie. Baha goes still. Sweetheart, he says carefully. Auntie went to visit. I want Auntie. Isul repeats, louder this time, her small face crumpling toward tears for the first time since she woke up. Not you. Auntie. I want Auntie. The doctor pulls Baha aside afterward, choosing her words with visible care. Children recovering from severe emotional and physical trauma, she explains, often regress toward whichever caregiver represents their strongest sense of safety. And in this case, that person is not, by his daughter's own repeated insistence, him. If there's any way to bring this woman back, the doctor says, even temporarily, I'd strongly recommend it. For her recovery. Possibly for her life. Baha stands in that hospital corridor for a long moment after the doctor walks away, jaw tight, pride and desperation waging a war behind his eyes that Doyen, watching from a few feet away, has genuinely never seen him lose before. Finally, without looking at anyone, Baha says 3 words of his own. Find her. Now. Tracking down a woman who doesn't want to be found should be simple for a man with Baha's resources. It isn't. Amanda has cut off contact with the house entirely, and when Doyen finally locates her new address through a mutual acquaintance from the agency that originally placed her, he delivers the news to Baha with visible reluctance. She said, Doyen reports carefully, and I'm quoting her directly, sir. If you want her, you come yourself. She's done being summoned. Baha stares at him for a long moment, genuinely uncertain whether he heard correctly. In 15 years of running an empire that spans 3 countries, Baha cannot recall the last time anyone spoke about him in terms of what they would or wouldn't tolerate. Men who cross him lose fingers. Women who defy him lose employment, contracts, sometimes entire businesses. And this woman, this nanny with a modest apartment and an empty bank account, is telling him, through an intermediary, to come find her himself. He goes anyway. Her building sits in a quieter neighborhood, unglamorous, the kind of place with a broken elevator sign and a landlord who clearly does the bare minimum. Baha climbs 4 flights of stairs, something he cannot remember doing in years, and knocks on a door with peeling paint, his bodyguards waiting uncomfortably in a car parked 2 blocks away because Amanda made it clear, through Doyen, that she wouldn't open the door if he arrived with an entourage. When she finally answers, she looks at him the way a person looks at an overdue delivery, mildly inconvenient, entirely unremarkable. You look terrible, she says, by way of greeting. Baha, a man who commands silence in rooms full of armed men, finds himself momentarily speechless. I need to talk to you, he manages. Come in, then. I was just making coffee. She turns and walks back into the apartment without waiting to see if he follows, leaving the door open behind her with the casual indifference of someone who has already decided how much power he has in this exchange, which is apparently none. He follows. The apartment is small, warm, filled with the kind of clutter that suggests an actual life lived in it. Books stacked on a side table, a half-finished crossword, a single potted plant clearly overwatered with love rather than neglect. It is, Baha notes with some discomfort, nothing like the sterile, curated perfection of his own home. Coffee, she asks, already pulling down 2 mugs. I don't drink coffee. You do today. She sets a mug down in front of him at the small kitchen table, and when he doesn't touch it, she simply stares at him until, to his own considerable surprise, he picks it up and drinks. It's terrible coffee. He drinks it anyway. Isul is in the hospital, he says finally, because there's no version of this conversation that doesn't start there. She collapsed 3 days after you left. She's been asking for you. Only you. Something flickers across Amanda's face. Real fear, real concern, quickly suppressed beneath a carefully maintained composure that Baha recognizes because he spent years perfecting the same technique. Is she okay? She will be. The doctors say. He hesitates, and admitting this costs him something visible, something Amanda watches happen in real time. They say she needs you, that the recovery is faster with someone she trusts. Someone who isn't me. Amanda sets her own mug down slowly. You threw my letter away. I know. I told you she needed to see a specialist. I told you 3 weeks before she collapsed. I know. You laughed at it. Each sentence lands like a small blade, precise and unhurried, and Baha, a man who has never once in his adult life allowed anyone to speak to him this way, simply absorbs it because he has no defense against something that is entirely true. I was wrong, he says. The words come out rough, unfamiliar in his mouth, like a language he's speaking for the first time. I need you to come back. For a moment, Amanda says nothing at all. Then she stands, walks to the door, and opens it, the universal signal for a conversation that has ended. Get out, she says, not unkindly but firmly. And think very carefully about whether you actually want me back, or whether you just need a problem solved. Because I already know the difference. I've been the second one before. Baha doesn't move. If I'm going to come back, he says slowly, what would it take? Amanda closes the door again, arms crossed, considering him with the calculating patience of someone who has clearly rehearsed this exact scenario in her head more than once, in the weeks since she left. Triple my previous salary, she says. No restrictions on how much time I spend with her. I discipline her the way I see fit, and you don't override me in front of her. Medical decisions concerning her health go through me first, not last. And if I ever write you a letter again telling you something is wrong, you read the entire thing. Out loud, if I have to make you. Baha almost laughs. Almost. That's not a negotiation, he says. That's a surrender. Then don't accept it. She shrugs, entirely unbothered, and reaches for the door handle again. I hear the Choi family is looking for a governess. I'm told their household is significantly less exhausting. The mention of a rival family's name, even one as harmless as a governess position, sends an irrational, hot spike of something through Baha's chest that he doesn't have time to examine or name. He tells himself it has nothing to do with jealousy. He tells himself it's simply about his daughter's well-being. He is, for perhaps the first time in his adult life, lying to himself and getting caught doing it by himself. Fine, he says. I accept your terms. Amanda studies his face for a long moment, searching for the catch, the hidden clause, the version of this where he's simply telling her what she wants to hear until Isul is stable and then quietly reversing course. She doesn't find one. Not because Baha has become a different man overnight, but because for the first time and longer than he can remember, something has genuinely frightened him more than losing control, and that thing is losing his daughter, and possibly, though he'd sooner die than admit it aloud, losing this maddening, unimpressed woman standing in her too small apartment negotiating with him like he's an ordinary man instead of the most feared name in Seoul's underworld. Get your coat, he says. We're going to the hospital. For the first time since he arrived, Amanda smiles, small, reluctant, but real. Took you long enough, she says, and grabs her keys. The drive to the hospital is quiet, neither of them quite sure how to occupy the space between who they were 3 weeks ago and whoever they're about to become. Amanda stares out the window at the city sliding past, and Baha finds himself glancing at her more than the road warrants, cataloging details he has no business noticing. The way she chews the inside of her cheek when she's nervous, the small gold ring on her thumb that doesn't match anything else she wears, the fact that she hasn't once, in the entire drive, asked him a single question about his business, his money, or his reputation. Every other woman who has ever sat in this car has asked about all three within the first 5 minutes. When they reach the hospital corridor outside Isul's room, Amanda pauses, suddenly uncertain, smoothing down her jacket like a woman about to walk into an interview rather than a hospital room. What if she's angry at me? She asks quietly. For leaving? Baha, who has spent the better part of a week failing to say the right thing to his own daughter, finds he has nothing useful to offer beyond the truth. She's not angry, he says. She's just been waiting. Amanda pushes open the door. Isul's head turns toward the sound of the door before her eyes even fully focus, some instinct in her recognizing the shape of the woman standing there before her conscious mind catches up. Then recognition arrives, whole and sudden, and something in her small face cracks open with a joy that hasn't been present in this room in 5 long, silent days. Auntie, The word comes out cracked, half sob, half shriek, and Amanda crosses the room in 3 strides and gathers her into her arms as carefully as the tubes and monitors will allow, murmuring reassurances into her hair while Isul clings to her with a desperation that makes even the nurses stationed nearby glance away, blinking hard. "I'm here," Amanda whispers. "I'm here. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Baha stands in the doorway, watching his daughter come back to life in real time in a way 5 days of doctors, specialists, and his own increasingly desperate attempts never managed. There's a version of himself, the version who existed 3 years ago before grief calcified into control, that might have felt threatened by this. Instead, standing in that hospital doorway, he feels something closer to relief, so overwhelming it nearly buckles his knees for the second time in a week. Within the hour, Isul is asking for food for the first time in days. Within 2 hours, she's eaten an entire bowl of soup, sitting up in bed, Amanda's hand never once leaving hers. The doctors, checking in periodically, exchange glances that say what none of them will state outright in front of the family, that whatever medicine can offer this child, it apparently cannot compete with the simple presence of someone she trusts. Baha watches all of this from a chair pulled into the corner of the room, quiet, present, no longer trying to insert himself into the center of his daughter's recovery. For the first time and longer than he can remember, he lets someone else hold the weight he spent 3 years insisting only he could carry. Isul is discharged 4 days later, and the transition back to the compound feels, to everyone on staff, like watching a house that has been holding its breath finally exhale. The following weeks reshape the household in ways nobody, least of all Baha, could have predicted. Amanda moves back into her old cottage at the edge of the property, though within a month, Isul has quietly relocated most of her stuffed animals there, declaring the main house too far away and refusing to sleep anywhere else. School mornings become a small, chaotic ritual. Amanda braiding hair while quizzing multiplication tables, Isul talking with her mouth full of toast, occasionally shouting questions down the hallway toward Baha's office that he answers without looking up from his paperwork, a habit that somehow becomes its own quiet form of affection. Homework happens at the kitchen table now instead of with the stern tutor, who is quietly reassigned to a different family within 2 weeks. Amanda cooks, badly at first, a fact Isul finds endlessly hilarious, then gradually with more confidence, filling the compound's enormous, sterile kitchen with smells it hasn't held since before Baha's wife passed. Birthdays, which used to be catered affairs with strangers in suits and forced smiles, become something smaller and louder. Movie nights migrate from the formal screening room to a blanket fort constructed, at Isul's insistence, directly in front of the television in the smaller family room. Amanda and Isul buried beneath cushions while Baha sits stiffly on the couch above them, pretending he isn't enjoying himself. He is, obviously, enjoying himself. Isul begins arguing with him too, genuine, unfiltered arguments about bedtimes, vegetables, whether she's allowed a dog, arguments no other person in his entire adult life has dared to have with him. He finds, to his own private bewilderment, that he doesn't hate it. There's something almost restorative about being challenged by someone who isn't afraid of him, who argues about broccoli with the same fearless conviction other people reserve for matters of life and death. Amanda challenges him too, though less about broccoli and more about everything else: his temper, his tendency to disappear into work rather than deal with feelings, his instinct to control situations rather than sit inside them. She calls him cold to his face on multiple occasions, usually while handing him a cup of coffee he didn't ask for, and he discovers, somewhat alarmingly, that he doesn't mind being called cold nearly as much when it's her doing the calling. Nobody in the household misses the way his office door, once permanently closed, now stays open most afternoons. Nobody misses the way he starts coming home earlier, or the way conversations at dinner have replaced the silent, efficient meals that used to define this house. It's Isul, inevitably, who names what everyone else is too cautious to say aloud. One evening, watching the 2 adults bicker good-naturedly over whose turn it is to help with her science project, she looks up from her workbook with the blunt, unfiltered honesty only children possess. "You're basically my parents now," she announces. "Both of you." The room goes quiet. "I'm your nanny," Amanda says quickly, though her ears have gone slightly pink. "He's your boss." Isul says, unimpressed, gesturing at Baha with her pencil like this settles the matter conclusively. I'm just saying what's true. Baha, for his part, says nothing at all, which everyone in the room understands by now. From a man who never says anything he doesn't mean, is its own kind of confession. Both adults deny it later, separately, to Doyen, with far more insistence than the accusation actually requires. Neither of them, notably, denies it to each other. There are smaller moments too, ones nobody announces or names, that stitch themselves into the fabric of the household without anyone quite noticing them happen. There's the afternoon Amanda teaches Isul to ride a bicycle in the compound's long gravel driveway, running alongside her with one hand hovering near the seat, until, without either of them realizing the exact moment it happens, Isul is pedaling alone, wobbling triumphantly toward the fountain, while Amanda stands frozen with pride, both hands pressed to her mouth. There's the school assembly a few weeks later where another parent, making polite conversation, assumes Amanda is Isul's mother and asks how she balances motherhood with, gesturing vaguely, everything else. Amanda opens her mouth to correct her, hesitates a half-second too long, and simply says, it's a lot, honestly, which isn't technically a lie. There's an art project Isul brings home from school, a family portrait, crayon and construction paper, 3 figures holding hands beneath a lopsided sun. Herself in the middle, Amanda on one side, Baha on the other, drawn slightly taller than everyone else, which Isul insists is simply accurate. Baha finds the drawing pinned haphazardly to the refrigerator one evening, studies it far longer than a piece of children's artwork typically warrants, then quietly removes it, folds it with unusual care, and places it in the top drawer of his office desk, beneath a stack of contracts nobody else has permission to touch. There's also a night neither of them ever discusses afterward, the week after Isul's discharge, when Baha can't sleep, and finds himself standing outside his daughter's bedroom door at 2 in the morning, simply watching her breathe, still terrified by how close he came to losing that privilege entirely. She starts seeing him regularly. Dinners at unremarkable restaurants. Walks along the river. Nothing extravagant, nothing performative, just the ordinary rhythm of 2 people getting to know each other without empires or grief or dead wives shadowing every interaction. Word of this reaches Baha the way most things eventually reach him, indirectly, through Doyen, who mentions it in passing while reviewing the week's schedule, entirely unaware of the effect the information will have. Miss Amanda has been seeing someone, Doyen says, flipping through his tablet. A Mr. Jinho, runs a dispatch company near Mapo. Baha doesn't look up from the documents on his desk. That's her business. Of course, sir. It doesn't concern me. Understood, sir. Baha continues signing documents for nearly a full minute after Doyen leaves the room before he realizes he signed the same page twice, and that his jaw has been clenched the entire time without his permission. He tells himself, repeatedly, over the following weeks, that this development is entirely irrelevant to him. He tells himself this while finding increasingly elaborate reasons to be present whenever Amanda leaves for one of her evenings out, standing at windows he has no business standing at, checking the time more frequently than any of his actual business dealings require. He tells himself this while noticing, with a discomfort he refuses to name, that Amanda seems lighter lately, laughing more easily on the phone in the evenings, humming while she cooks in a way that suggests genuine happiness rather than mere contentment. He should be glad for her. He finds, disturbingly, that gladness is the furthest thing from what he actually feels. The feeling comes to a head one evening when Amanda returns from a dinner with Jinho later than usual, cheeks flushed from the cold, still smiling at something on her phone as she crosses the courtyard toward her cottage. Baha happens to be standing near the study window, a coincidence he'll insist on later, though nobody in the household believes him, least of all himself, and watches her pause beneath the garden lights, laughing quietly at whatever message she's just received. Something ugly and unfamiliar coils tight in his chest, an emotion he hasn't allowed himself to feel this intensely since long before his wife died. He recognizes it, eventually, for exactly what it is, though the recognition brings him no comfort whatsoever. Jealousy. Plain, undignified, entirely inconvenient jealousy, the kind he has spent a decade training himself never to feel about anything. Because feelings like that are precisely the sort of weakness that gets men in his position killed. He doesn't sleep well that night, or several nights after. Isul, sharper than any adult in her orbit gives her credit for, notices the shift immediately. She notices the way her father grows quieter on the evenings Amanda has plans. She notices the way he lingers near the kitchen on nights Amanda cooks dinner for the household instead of going out, as though relieved by her presence in a way he'd never admit aloud. One evening, doing homework at the kitchen table while Amanda washes dishes and hums to herself, Isul sets down her pencil and studies her father with the same unflinching directness that unsettled Soyeon months earlier. "You don't like Jinho," she announces. Baha, seated across from her pretending to review a stack of reports, doesn't look up. "I don't know him well enough to have an opinion. You made a face when Auntie mentioned him at dinner." "I did not make a face." "You did," Isul says, entirely unbothered by contradicting him, the way she has learned nobody else in his life dares to. "You make the same face when someone tries to sit in your chair." Baha has no response to this observation, mostly because it is, uncomfortably, accurate. Amanda, overhearing this exchange from the sink with her back turned, says nothing, though the corner of her mouth twitches in a way that suggests she's fighting very hard not to smile. The weeks that follow carry a tension nobody names directly, but everyone in the household feels. In Baha's increasingly frequent excuses to be present during Amanda's evenings, in Amanda's carefully maintained distance whenever those excuses grow too transparent, in the quiet, unspoken standoff between a man who has never once in his life chased anything he wasn't certain he could win, and a woman who has decided, after years of being an afterthought in other people's priorities, that she will not settle for being anyone's second choice again. Something has to break eventually. Neither of them expects it to happen over dinner, at a restaurant neither of them chose, on an evening that begins, for one of them at least, as entirely ordinary. The restaurant sits along a quiet street in a neighborhood known more for its charm than its extravagance, small tables lit with candles, the kind of place Jinho chose specifically because it feels intimate rather than impressive. Amanda arrives in a dress she bought for the occasion, hair down instead of in its usual practical braid, and for the first time in longer than she can remember, she feels something close to lightness settle over her, the sense that her life, finally, might belong entirely to her. Jinho is already seated when she arrives, standing immediately to pull out her chair, and the evening unfolds exactly the way their evenings together always do. Easy conversation, comfortable silences, the particular unremarkable peace of being with someone who asks nothing complicated of her. She's laughing at something he said, wine glass halfway to her lips, when the restaurant's front door opens and the entire room shifts. It isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. But there's a particular quality certain men carry into a room, a gravity that rearranges the air itself, and every head near the entrance turns before anyone quite understands why. Baha stands in the doorway, dressed for an evening he clearly hadn't planned, scanning the restaurant with the focused intensity of a man who has already spotted exactly what, or who, he came looking for. Amanda's wine glass stops halfway to her mouth. "What is he doing here?" she says quietly, more to herself than to Jinho, though Jinho follows her gaze and immediately understands, with the quick, unspoken comprehension of a man who has clearly heard enough about Amanda's employer to recognize trouble walking through a door. Baha crosses the restaurant without hurrying, without hesitation, weaving between tables with the unbothered confidence of a man who has never once in his life questioned whether a room would make space for him. It does. It always does. He stops directly beside their table. Jinho rises immediately, some old-fashioned instinct toward politeness overriding whatever alarm bells are clearly going off in his head, extending a hand that Baha doesn't take. "I'm sorry," Jinho says carefully, glancing between Baha and Amanda, trying to read a situation nobody has explained to him. "Do you two know each other from? May I have a moment with my wife?" The words land in the restaurant like something physical, silencing not just their table, but the two nearest them as well, several strangers pausing mid-bite, mid-sentence, mid-sip, caught in the sudden gravitational pull of a sentence that makes absolutely no sense, and yet somehow explains everything at once. Amanda's glass tips slightly in her hand, wine sloshing dangerously close to the rim before she catches it, staring up at Baha with an expression caught somewhere between disbelief and something else entirely, something she hasn't allowed herself to feel in months. "What?" she says, barely above a whisper. Jinho, to his credit, doesn't argue. He simply looks at Amanda's face, really looks at it, at whatever is happening behind her eyes, and understands. With the quiet dignity of a man who never expected to win a fight he didn't know he was in, that this particular battle was decided long before he ever met her. "I'll settle the bill," he says gently, and steps away without another word, leaving the two of them alone at a table lit by a single flickering candle. Baha lowers himself into the vacated seat, and for a long moment, neither of them speaks. The restaurant slowly resumes its low hum of conversation around them, though the two nearest tables remain conspicuously, unashamedly attentive. "You can't just do that," Amanda says finally, her voice unsteady, equal parts furious and something far softer underneath. "You can't just walk into a restaurant and say something like that. We're not." "I know what we're not," Baha says. "I've known for months. I've watched you have dinners with someone else, laugh at his jokes, come home smelling like his cologne, and I told myself every single time it didn't concern me." "Baha, it concerns me," he says, cutting through her protest with a directness that costs him visibly, the same rawness that surfaced once before, in a hospital corridor, when he begged her to come back for reasons that were never only about his daughter. "It has concerned me since the moment you walked back into that hospital room and my daughter looked at you like the sun had come back into the sky. It concerned me every single night after, watching you become the center of a house I built specifically to have no center at all." Amanda's eyes have gone bright, though whether from anger or something else entirely, even she doesn't seem certain. "You had every chance to say something," she says. "Months of chances. Instead you just watched. Let me think you didn't care." "I was terrified," Baha admits, and the word sounds foreign in his own mouth, clumsy from disuse. "Men like me don't survive by wanting things this badly. Wanting things is how you lose them. I told myself if I never said it out loud, it couldn't be taken from me. And now I'd rather lose everything trying than keep losing you slowly by saying nothing." The candle between them flickers. Somewhere across the restaurant, a spoon clatters against a plate, forgotten by whoever was holding it. "Isul told us this would happen," Amanda says finally, something wet and disbelieving creeping into her laugh. "Months ago, at the kitchen table, she said we'd both be her real parents someday, and we just laughed it off like children say things they don't understand. She understood something we didn't," Baha says quietly, "or wouldn't let ourselves." Amanda studies him across the candlelight. This man who commands fear from grown adults twice his size, who has spent 3 years building a fortress around every soft part of himself, sitting across from her now with nothing left hidden, nothing left calculated, simply a man asking, in the only language he has left, for the one thing his empire was never built to provide him. "I've kept you waiting long enough," he says again, quieter this time, less declaration than confession. "I know I have no right to ask you to stop waiting now, but I'm asking anyway." Amanda sets down her wine glass, reaches across the small table, past the candle, and takes his hand. The first time, she realizes distantly that she has ever touched him without a child or a crisis standing between them. "You have terrible timing," she says. "You know that? Terrible. I'm aware. You couldn't have said any of this 3 months ago, before I let myself actually consider building a life with someone else." "I could have," Baha admits. "I was a coward." The honesty of it, the total absence of excuse-making, seems to land harder than any declaration could have. "Isul is going to be unbearable about this," Amanda says eventually, something breaking loose in her voice that sounds dangerously close to a laugh threatening to become tears. "She's going to say she called it. She's going to say it constantly. For years. I know. She's going to want a wedding with a bounce house. She's going to get one," Baha says, and for the first time since walking into the restaurant, something in his expression softens into an actual smile. Small, unguarded, the same rare smile the household staff caught a glimpse of once, in a garden, watching soap bubbles drift past a laughing child, before everything nearly fell apart. Outside the restaurant window, Jinho climbs into a taxi alone, glancing back once at the pair still seated at that small candlelit table, and allows himself a rueful, understanding smile of his own before the car pulls away into the Seoul night. Inside, Amanda hasn't let go of Baha's hand. "There's something you should know," she says slowly, something shifting in her expression, hesitation replacing the softness of a moment ago. "Before this goes any further, before Isul finds out and starts planning a wedding you can't take back." Baha's grip tightens slightly around her fingers. "What is it?" Amanda glances toward the restaurant door, toward the street beyond it, toward a version of her past she has spent 3 years making sure never followed her into this life. "The reason I left my last job before I ever came to work for you," she says quietly. "It wasn't for the reasons in my file." Somewhere behind her carefully composed expression, something old and unresolved flickers to life. Something that has nothing to do with Jinho, nothing to do with Seoyeon, nothing to do with anything Baha has spent the last several months worrying about. Something from before. Something that is, apparently, about to walk back into both of their lives whether either of them is ready for it or not. "Baha," she says, her voice dropping lower, urgent now in a way it wasn't seconds ago. "There's a man who's going to come looking for me. And when he does, he's not going to care that you're the most dangerous man in Seoul." The candle between them gutters in a sudden draft from the door. Neither of them notices, at first, the black sedan that has just pulled up outside the restaurant window, engine idling, headlights cutting through the dark. Baha follows her gaze toward the window, and whatever composure 3 years of underworld dominance built into his features drops away entirely the moment he sees the sedan idling at the curb. He knows that car. Not the model, not the plates, the stillness of it. The particular, deliberate patience of men who don't need to hurry because they've already decided how the evening ends. "Amanda." His voice has changed completely, stripped of the warmth from moments ago, replaced by something colder, sharper, the voice of a man recalculating threats in real time. "Who is he?" She doesn't answer immediately. Her hand, still wrapped around his, has gone rigid. "Someone I thought I buried a long time ago," she says finally. "Someone who doesn't forgive people for leaving." The restaurant door opens. A man steps through it, unhurried, dressed like money that predates Baha's own by at least a generation, his eyes scanning the room with the same proprietary confidence Baha walked in with minutes earlier. Except this time, it's Baha's table he's walking toward. He stops beside them, glances at their joined hands, and smiles in a way that carries absolutely no warmth whatsoever. "Amanda," he says, and her name in his mouth sounds like something being reclaimed rather than spoken. "You didn't think I'd let you disappear forever, did you?" Baha rises slowly from his chair, every instinct that built his empire sharpening to a point. "I don't know who you are," he says, voice low, dangerous, "but you're going to walk back out that door." The stranger doesn't so much as blink. "Ask her who I am," he says, still smiling. "Ask her what she took from my family before she ran. Ask her whose name is actually on that adoption file for the little girl she's so attached to now." The candle between them gutters out entirely. Amanda's face has gone white. "Baha," she starts. "What is he talking about?" Baha's voice is quiet now, terrifyingly quiet, the same stillness that made grown men disappear without a headline. Amanda opens her mouth to answer. The lights in the restaurant flicker once, twice, and go out completely. Somewhere in the sudden darkness, chairs scrape back. A woman screams. Glasses shatter against tile as the crowd scrambles for the exits. And in the chaos, Baha loses the grip on Amanda's hand for one terrifying second, long enough to feel, with a cold certainty he hasn't known since the night his wife died, that something has already been taken from him that he hasn't fully understood yet. He reaches for her again in the dark, fingers closing around empty air where her hand should be. "Amanda." No answer comes back. The last thing heard clearly before true chaos erupts is the stranger's voice, calm, almost amused, cutting through the darkness directly beside their table. "You should have told him everything, Amanda, before he found out from me." Then silence. Then the sound of a door closing somewhere behind them, quiet and final. When the lights flicker back on 30 seconds later, Baha is standing alone at the table, chair overturned, candle extinguished, the seat across from him empty. Amanda is gone. To be continued. If you made it this far, you already know this story isn't finished, and neither is Amanda's past. Comment Part 2. Right now, if you need to know who that man is, what he knows about Isil, and whether Baha ever forgives the secret Amanda's been keeping since before she ever set foot in that garden. Like this video, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one.